Welcome to Learning Module 3. This is covering essentially social organization. It's called kinship and social order. So, for instance, in many modes of livelihood like foraging and horticulture, pastoralism, and family agriculture in particular, the kin group is the main form of social organization. So it may seem like kinship and then social order, like friends, etc., are two very different things, but in fact they're not. So that's what this learning module is looking at. And hopefully you understand those concepts by the end of this. So I want you to be able to understand how kinship is a major element of social organization, the different types of kinship, and also different types of social organization and order. So, forms of hierarchy in social groups. We have a lot of hierarchy in our culture. So some of it's earned, some of it you're born into, and that's highly variable depending on the culture. So I want you to take a look at those things. So here are your PowerPoint files, lecture 7 and 8, your chapters, you've got a few, and then you're actually going to be watching a short video here. So it's called A Class Divided. It's a Frontline special from several years ago, and so it's right here. So if we click on this, what happens? Go to this link, and here we have, just ignore that. Sometimes it's going to ask you what your PBS station is. Just say yes to whatever it asks you. And this is the documentary. It's 53 minutes long. In fact, I think technically it's 50 minutes long, and there's like a 3-minute intro. You must watch this. There will be questions on the quiz about it. You are required to turn in a question answer sheet that is also attached there somewhere. Yeah, so if we go back here. This document right here, Jane Elliott, Class Divided. This is a Word document. This is your what's due when file. This is a Word document that just asks you questions going through the video, and so just answer these throughout the video. Save it and upload it again to that thing. So you're required to watch that movie. The quiz will be available during the quiz dates. You are going to be making your own kinship diagram. You can draw it out by pen or pencil and take a photo of it and upload the photo with your response. You also have to have a page write up explaining your kinship diagram or telling me about kinship in our culture or whatever. So that document needs to be there. I made my kinship diagram in PowerPoint and saved it as an image because that's how I like to do things. If you have another computer program that you want to do it with, that's fine, but you need to give me the kinship diagram and you need to give me your write-up on it. So that's this assignment. So you've got 2 assignments essentially that need to be turned in this learning module. And then of course you've got your discussion. So let's look at these PowerPoint lectures. So lecture 7 is looking at kinship systems. So family groupings, essentially. This is my family, so that's just showing you how I view kinship. Modes of livelihood and kinship are tightly tied. The definitions of who we consider kin, who we consider family, that varies, right? We actually trace family lines from both parents very often in this culture. That's not the case for every culture. So this is actually me as a baby, and this is my grandma, my maternal grandmother, and this is her brother. I called him uncle. That's not going to be the case in every culture, and that's actually probably not the case for all of you. Some of you may have been close to your extended family relatives, and some of you may not be. So here is my kinship diagram, and so let's look at this. I've made all females circles and all males triangles. If you want to use, these are the standard symbols. You don't have to use these. If you have yourself or a family member who is transgendered, you can decide which you want to use. You're not graded for your kinship diagram on how, which symbol you use. You're just graded on, did you give me the kinship diagram? Did you structure it like a kinship diagram? It's not a family tree. if a family tree would have names for all of these people. This doesn't have names. This is telling me the relationship that I have to these people. And you can find me right away because I'm ego. I'm shaded in. You always shade in ego on a kinship diagram. So this is my husband. You don't need his name. He's husband. This is my brother. This is an old diagram. He's not married. But this was, at the time, his girlfriend. They were cohabitating. So in the assignment, I actually give you a key that shows you which symbols are for what in a standard system. But again, as long as you are consistent and you give me your own key, if you varied from that, then that's totally fine. So if someone is deceased, you put a line through them. So my grandparents and my uncle are deceased. If they're divorced, you put a line through that marriage. And then this here is this uncle. He's divorced from this woman and he cohabitated but no longer does with this woman. And then, yeah, so it can get messy. It can be a lot of people. It could be 5 people. What I would like to see is at least 3 generations. So you need you on there. So you should have your generation, and if you have kids or your parents and grandparents, whatever, I want you to think about who you consider family. Now, another way that I think is totally fine to do a kinship diagram is if you have people that you consider family that you're not directly related to, well, you can put them on here, figure out how you want to do it, and then include the explanation for that in your little write-up. So you don't have to be really regimented with how you do this. I just want you to think about what is family and who is family to you, and is that a norm in our culture, or do you slightly vary from that? That's essentially what I'm asking. So take a look at these. We do practice bilineal descent, but I've only given you my mother's side of this family. And, we could figure out, do I consider them stronger? Do I have a stronger kinship bond with them? So I've given you just them. And actually, yes, that is true. That's the sort of thing that you might want to include in that paper description. So we actually use Eskimo kinship terminology, which means that mother, father, brother, sister, those people are unique. And we trace bilineally through both sides of the family, and my father's brother I call uncle, and my mother's brother I call uncle, so they get the same terms, and that's what it means to use Eskimo kinship terminology. So there are different ways to describe kin. Different cultures have different rules for where people would live, who they would be allowed to marry, who they share things with, how things are inherited, who has rights. So this is all about social organization and what kinship is, and kinship through marriage. Something that sometimes people have issues with in terms of cultural relativism is variation in marriage practices. So the standard, I hate saying things like that, but very often the most acceptable form of marriage in our culture is monogamous. So marriage between 2 people. And only relatively recently, right, within my lifetime and probably within all of your lifetimes, have we allowed legally marriage between people of variable sexes, essentially. And so these marriage rules related to, who can marry who and under what circumstances, those are very culturally specific. So some cultures, polygamy is totally normal. Polygamy is marriage between more than 2 people. So polygyny is when one man marries more than one woman. This is the most common type of polygamy. But there's also something called polyandry that fewer people know about, and this is when one woman is married to more than one man. Different cultures practice these, right? And so here's a photo. Here's this woman, and she's married to 2 men, and they have kids, right? Why? It could have to do with inheritance. It could have to do with resources. Usually there are reasons that cultures have evolved the way that they have. What I need from you is A, to understand these things, and B, to realize that you don't get to judge people. If you think that marriage between more than 2 people is inappropriate, that is irrelevant. It is not relevant to other cultures. It's not, people choose and cultures choose what is practiced. And so every person deserves to be treated with respect. And this is not, you cannot judge people, this is appropriate, this is inappropriate, this is whatever, based on your own standards from your culture. And so this, you need to exercise cultural relativism here. And in the face-to-face classes, people have had issues with this. That's why I'm bringing this up. Other forms of marriage, sororate. This is when a man marries sisters. So this can happen in two different ways. Both sisters could be alive. It could be 5 sisters, it could be whatever, but they're sisters. They could all be alive at the same time, or sometimes this happens after one of them has died, he would marry another sister. If that's the case, very often this has to do with bride price and dowry and stuff like that. So the families have this social tie that they want to maintain, and so if this one sister died and he marries another one, then they still have that social tie. So there are usually cultural reasons for these variations in how marriage and kinship is played out. So take a look at this and read the book chapters, read the book chapters, read the book chapters. And then lecture 8 goes through non-kin groups and microcultures. So I want you to think about what other social groups you participate in. For me, my family is actually one of my most important social groups, but that's not the case for all people. So, do you have this friend group? Are you a member of a club? Are you, a member of some other organization? And is that the most important thing in your life? So think about the way that people organize themselves and the different types of social organizations that exist. And then also think about how we stratify. So rank. And you would, well, we don't rank people in our culture. Some people say that. Well, okay, but I am a professor and you are a student. And so in this way that we've organized ourselves socially, I do outrank you, right? So how is the social stratification played out in different ways in our culture? There are different types of social statuses. There's achieved social status and ascribed social status. So achieved is earned and ascribed is born into. So when we talk about status, most often people think money. So, the caste system in India. And you can be born into the higher caste or born into a lower caste, and you're born there and you'll die there. That's ascribed. Achieved is, well, maybe I was born to a family that was poor and I earned money, right? And now I'm wealthy. That can be achieved. But, think a little bit more outside the box. Realize that I hate the word race because race is a cultural construct. So we have to talk about the elements of that. But race is an ascribed social status for the most part. And that depends on culture. Different cultures look at race in different ways. But gender is an ascribed social status. Again, there's some variation to that. But in general, it's an ascribed social status. You're born into that. And so think about different ways. Which is there a sex or a gender that outranks another in your culture? Is there a race or ethnic group that outranks another in your culture? So I want you to think about those things. Another thing that some students take issue with is a discussion about how we do live in a patriarchy. All this means is that there is some element of male dominance in the culture. So when you look at our government, for instance, you see that the majority of government officials are male. That is, by definition, a patriarchy. When you look at healthcare and you look at birth control access and how many women are denied birth control access, that is evidence of a patriarchy. And so this is another thing where students sometimes get very defensive. It's nothing to get defensive about. It's a definition, and it's what fits within that definition. So what that means is that males do, to some extent, outrank females in this social system. So I want you to think about this as a scientist, as an anthropologist, and understand achieved and ascribed social statuses and, how these are interpreted and seen. So that's your intro to this learning module. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns.